And then he says, and that which you take from us is more beloved than that which you leave behind. Meaning we prefer for you to take everything of our property than to leave anything behind for us. And so, when Sa'ad finished his words, the Sahaba looked around and they described the face of the Prophet ﷺ as though it was radiating with light. The happiness could not be wiped off the face of Rasulullah ﷺ. These were the very words which he was waiting for. The words of the chief of the Ansar, that they'll be with him in good and bad, in difficulty and ease. And so, he says, go forward and be optimistic, for Allah has promised me one of the two. Either the caravan or the army. And he knows the caravan has already passed, meaning Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is certain that Allah Ta'ala has promised him the army, meaning they're going to gain victory in the battle. Before even commencing the battle, he knows, has yaqeen that Allah Ta'ala will gain him victory. But even with this yaqeen, look at his hal during the battle. Look at his tadarru', look at his sujood. He makes sujood 3 times. And his dua, Ya Hayy Ya Qayyum, in the night before the battle. All this, and he knows that Allah Ta'ala will give him victory. So how about for us believers? Us people of Iman. We know Allah will give us victory, but we don't know when. But yet, sometimes we curve away, we swerve away from the obedience and devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not part from, even when he knew that Allah Ta'ala's command will come down without waiver. And so, that night, the Sahaba, they observed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sleeping. They observed him in dua to Allah. While the majority of the Sahaba slept that night because of their traveling and their difficulty and the heat, the Prophet ﷺ remains awake on the night of Badr. And on this night of Badr, as he has his rida, his cloak over him, and he raises his hands to the heavens in dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his cloak falls from him. Abu Bakr is with him. Abu Bakr takes his cloak and he puts it back onto the shoulders of the Prophet ﷺ. He says, Ya Rasulullah, enough. Ya Rasulullah, you've made enough dua. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gives him glad tidings of the victory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant them in the battle of Badr. And on that night before the battle, and this is the night which we are coming into right now. This night which we are coming into right now, the eve of the 17th. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, before the battle has even taken place and before the enemies have come, he points to the place in which each one of the enemies will die. And he says, this is the place of Abu Jahl, and this is the place of such, and this is the place of such and such. And the Sahaba said, after the battle, we went and saw the exact place which the Prophet ﷺ indicated that that particular person will die. He was right there. He didn't move. Not 1 inch. Right there. And so the Prophet ﷺ is with his Sahaba. He sends another group during the day. He sends Ali ibn Abi Talib and Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awam and Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas with a number of the other Sahaba to the well of Badr before they have arrived at Badr in order to seek out some more news. And this group of 3 Sahaba, Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib and the others, they return with 2 boys. They capture these 2 boys thinking that they're from the caravan of Abu Sufyan. And they come back to the Prophet ﷺ after interrogating them and questioning them, and they started hitting them until they admitted that they were from the caravan of Abu Sufyan. But in fact, they were from the servants of the army of Quraysh who had gone to get some water for the army to come back. But the Sahaba, because they were still wanting to go out and seek the caravan and to take its merchandise, they continue to hit until this person admits that he's from the caravan. In fact, he's not. And the Prophet ﷺ testifies to this. And so the Prophet ﷺ asked him, how many are in the army? And he says, I don't know. They said, okay. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, how many animals do they have? How many camels? And so they tell him regarding the camels, how many they slaughter each day. How many do they slaughter? And so the boys say, one day they slaughter 9, and another day they slaughter 10. So the Prophet ﷺ makes some calculations and says, then, in that case, they're between 900 and 1,000 in number. Because for every camel that they slaughter, they have 100 people who eat from its meat. And the Prophet ﷺ was ummi, he was illiterate, but he calculated. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so, he also learned from these boys that the chiefs of Quraysh were amongst the army, like Abu Jahl and Umayyah and Utbah and others. And so the Prophet ﷺ motivates the Sahaba and tells him that the chiefs of Quraysh have come here one body before you, so get ready for them. And so he let the boys go back to their army with the water. And then the Prophet ﷺ on this Thursday, the 16th of Ramadan, because the 17th of Ramadan fell on a Friday, and the 16th of Ramadan was on a Thursday in the year. They arrived to the beginning of the area of Badr at the beginning of the wells and the water. And the Prophet ﷺ stops there. One of the Sahaba, Al-Hubab ibn al-Mundhir, he says to Rasulullah, he says, Ya Rasulullah, is this revelation that has descended upon you such that we have no opinion whether to accept or not, meaning this place where you've camped, or is this from your own opinion and your military strategy in warfare? And the Prophet ﷺ says it's the latter. It's from the military strategy. And so the Sahabi says, in that case, I feel it would be better and more strategic for us to advance such that the water is behind us, and so we prevent the enemy from arriving at the water, and so we have the water, and if they need the water, then they will eventually come to fight us. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he considered the opinion, and he accepted the consultation. And he went with his troops, and they camped further on. Another sign for us that in this case Rasulullah ﷺ, who had wahi descend upon him, seeks the consultation of his Sahaba and accepts it. And so, us as believers, any affair that comes upon us, we seek the advice and assistance of our fellow believers, as long as it's in accordance with the guidance of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so then, on this eve of Friday the 17th, the Thursday night, the end of the night, they complete building this trough or this basin in which they will gather the water for them. And then Sa'd bin Mu'adh addresses the Prophet ﷺ, and he suggests to him that they build a tent or a shelter for him. And he says the reason for this is that in case we get ambushed, you'll be protected, and we'll have guards on the outside such that you'll be protected and you can be taken quickly back to Medina and no harm will come to you. And he says, and if Allah gives us strength, then we'll be victorious and everything will be fine and well. So to be on the safe side, we'll build you this shelter. And so they build him this shelter, and the Prophet ﷺ accepts. And they have to assign a guard for the night to keep guard and keep watch, while the Prophet ﷺ is in his tent or his shelter in dua to Allah. And none other is chosen than As-Siddiq, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, the one who kept company in the Ghar with the Prophet ﷺ, keeps company and watch for the Prophet ﷺ on the night of Badr. And so, at this, Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ thanks Sa'd bin Mu'adh for coming up with the suggestion and gathering the Sahaba to build this booth for him. And this night they all sleep. They all sleep. However, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam remains in prayer until the dawn of Fajr. He remains in dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he knows a great day is ahead. And by Allah, it is not the physical efforts and the swords and the courage and the camels and the ammunition and the weapons and the property that gave victory to Sahaba and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that day. But it was by the barakah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's dua and the sincere determination and tawakkul ala Allah of the Sahaba that Allah Ta'ala gave them victory. And so they didn't rely on their physical means, because if they were to rely on their physical means, then they would have been destroyed and defeated. And any person will say this. An army such as humble and as poor as this to meet an army as rich as the army of Quraysh will be defeated for sure. But their reliance was not on physical means. So a lesson to you, O believer. In your matters of dunya, fulfill everything that you need to fulfill in arriving at your physical needs, but do not place your reliance upon them. So the studies that you do, and the work that you gain, and the occupation that you undertake, and the knowledge that you acquire, and the dawah efforts that you perform, and the pamphlets that you write, and the lectures which you give, and the non-Muslims which you speak to, and in the end it's with Allah. Have no reliance on your means and your efforts, and your sacrifice and your struggle, but have reliance on Allah.